My name is Arthur, and I guess you could say I'm a man of simple principles. I've always believed in putting in a hard day's work, in being loyal to the people you love, and in the quiet, unspoken dignity of keeping your promises. For most of my 68 years, those principles, they served me pretty well. They helped me build a life, raise a family, and sleep soundly at night. But then came the day. A day I'll never forget, when my own daughter, my Amelia, looked me square in the eye and said the words that shattered everything. "You will either serve my husband," she said, her voice cold as ice, "or get out of my house." In that one moment, standing in the living room I had paid for, surrounded by memories of a life I thought we all cherished, I didn't get angry. I didn't shout or scream. I smiled. It was a sad, tired little smile, the kind you give when you realize a long and difficult chapter of your life has finally come to an end. I picked up the small suitcase that, for some reason I couldn't explain even to myself, I had already packed that morning, and I walked right out the front door. I think she was expecting me to fall apart, to beg her to reconsider, to do what I had always done for my entire life, give in for the sake of peace. But this time was different. A week later, my phone showed 22 missed calls, each one more frantic than the last. And believe me when I tell you, that was only the very beginning of my plan. They were about to learn a very hard lesson, that a quiet man's principles, when pushed too far, can become the most unbending, unmovable force in the entire world. Before I get into how this all unfolded, how I went from a doormat to the man I am today, do me a small favor, if you don't mind. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and maybe drop a comment down below to let me know where you're watching from. It really does mean a lot to know who's out there listening to an old man's story. It all really started on a Saturday afternoon. The keys to the front door were still warm in my palm as I pushed my way inside. I had a heavy grocery bag in each hand, and you know how the thin plastic handles can dig into your wrists? I could feel them cutting deep, leaving those angry red lines. The spring sunlight was filtering through the living room curtains, the ones Eleanor and I picked out together years ago, and it made everything in the room look soft and peaceful. Usually, that sight would make me smile. It was a simple thing, but it was home. But not that day, because there he was. Leo, my son-in-law, was sprawled out in my leather recliner. My recliner. That was the last gift Eleanor gave me before the cancer took her. It was my chair, my spot. His feet, covered in socks that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in a week, were propped up on the footrest. A half-empty bottle of that expensive imported beer he likes was dangling from his fingers, and the TV remote was resting on his belly like it was a king's scepter. He didn't even bother to look up from the basketball game that was blaring from the television. "Hey, old man," he grunted, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Grab me another beer from the fridge while you're up." I just stood there for a second, feeling the immense weight of the milk cartons and the loaves of bread in the bags. I slowly, carefully, set the grocery bags down on the floor. The plastic had left these throbbing welts across my palms. "Excuse me?" I said, and my voice was quiet, almost too quiet. "You heard me," he shot back, still not looking at me. "One of those imported ones, not that cheap stuff you drink." A cold, tight knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I had bought those imported beers specifically for him. I had used a piece of my Social Security check, money that I budget down to the last penny, to buy beer that I would never, ever touch just so he would have something he liked. "Leo," I said, and I was trying so hard to keep my voice even, to not let the tremor of anger show. "I just walked in the door. I need to put these groceries away before the ice cream melts." Finally, he tore his eyes away from the TV and looked at me. And his face, it wore that expression I had come to know so well. It was a look of bored annoyance, the kind of look that said I was being difficult, that I was being unreasonable. "What's the big deal?" he sighed, like I was the one creating a problem. "I'm already on my feet. I'm comfortable." The big deal was that this was my house. The big deal was that I was 68 years old and had just carried his groceries and his beer up the front steps. His feet hit the floor with a heavy, deliberate thud. He stood up slowly, and he used his height to loom over me. At 30, he was a big guy, much broader and taller than I am now, but, I've dealt with bullies my whole life. You learn a thing or two about how to stand your ground without throwing a punch. "Your house?" he scoffed, and the sound was full of contempt. "That's funny, because last I checked, your daughter and I live here. We pay the bills." "With my money," I thought, but I didn't say it. Details, right? Small, inconvenient details. He took another step closer, the beer bottle still in his hand. "Look, Arthur," he said, and his voice dropped into this low, threatening tone. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You want to keep living here in peace? You play ball. It's as simple as that." Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and my daughter, Amelia, appeared. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took in the scene in an instant, Leo towering over me, the air so thick with tension you could almost see it shimmering. "What's going on?" Her voice had that sharp, warning edge to it, an edge I remembered from when she was a teenager and I'd caught her sneaking out. "Your father's being difficult," Leo said, without ever taking his eyes off me. "I just asked him to get me a beer, and he's turning it into a federal case." Amelia looked at me then, and what I saw in her eyes, it broke a little piece of my heart that I didn't even know was still whole. It was disappointment, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum in the middle of a grocery store. "Dad," she said, and her voice was so weary, so tired. "Just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." But Leo, he wasn't finished. He moved even closer, so close I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "See, Arthur," he said, like he was explaining something to a child. "Let me explain how this is going to work from now on. You live in our house, you contribute, and that means when I ask you to do something, you do it. No questions, no attitude." Our house. The words just hung there in the quiet of the room. I kept my voice perfectly level, even though my heart felt like it was hammering against my ribs, trying to escape. "That's right," Amelia said, and she stepped up to stand right beside her husband. She presented this united front, this solid wall that I knew, in that moment, I could never break through. "Dad, you need to make a choice right now. Either you help Leo and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." There it was, the ultimatum. The words filled the space between us like smoke, choking me. I looked at my daughter, my Amelia, and I searched her face, trying to find any trace of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms because she was scared. The little girl I read Goodnight Moon to every single night until she was 7. But all I saw was a stranger staring back at me with the same entitled, cold expression as her husband. "All right," I said, and my voice was barely a whisper. Leo smirked, this smug, triumphant look spreading across his face. He thought he'd won. He thought the old man had finally been put in his place. "Good," he said, already starting to turn back toward his recliner, his kingdom. "Now about that beer." "I'll pack," I said. The smirk vanished from his face as if it had been wiped clean with a wet cloth. Amelia's mouth fell open just slightly. I could see the pure shock in her eyes. She expected me to crumble, to apologize, to scurry off to the kitchen like a defeated, obedient old man. I turned away from both of them. leaving the grocery bag sitting there on the floor, the ice cream slowly melting, and I walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard Leo's sharp intake of breath and Amelia's faint, disbelieving whisper, "Dad, wait." But I was already walking. My footsteps were steady on the hardwood floors, the same floors Eleanor and I had spent a whole summer refinishing together 20 years ago. Every single step was a memory, and every memory was another reason why I couldn't stay. The suitcase came down from the top shelf of the closet with a soft, dusty thump. I bought it for our honeymoon, a trip to Yellowstone National Park, back when Eleanor was still alive and the future felt like this wide open road stretching out into a golden sunset. Now it gaped open on the bed, empty, waiting to swallow up the last few remnants of my life in this house. I packed with a strange sense of calm. It was methodical. Underwear, socks, a few changes of clothes. I wasn't taking everything, just enough to get by. From the living room I could hear their voices, a low, urgent murmur of whispers. Leo's voice would rise every so often, sharp and angry, followed by Amelia's softer, more uncertain tones. They were trying to figure out what to do, how to handle the old man's quiet, unexpected rebellion. My hands moved without any conscious thought, folding shirts, rolling ties. The framed photo of Eleanor that always sat on my nightstand, I wrapped it carefully in a t-shirt and tucked it securely into the side pocket. My medications, my reading glasses, the small leather-bound journal where I tracked every single penny of my expenses, all of it went into the bag. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hallway, they fell silent. Leo was back in the recliner, but he wasn't relaxed anymore. He was sitting ramrod straight, watching my every move, his eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. Amelia stood by the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was trying to look stern, to look like she was in control, but I could see the uncertainty, the flicker of fear in her eyes. Neither of them said a word as I walked past. Not goodbye, not sorry, not anything. The car, my old, reliable Buick, started on the first try, just like it always did. I backed out of the driveway slowly. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't want to see if they were watching from the window. The 30-minute drive to the Pine Lodge Motel gave me time to think. And the memories, they came in waves, each one a fresh sting of betrayal. I drove through downtown Kalispell, the town where I'd built my entire life, and I remembered Amelia's college tuition. $40,000 a year for that fancy private school she just had to go to. I'd worked overtime at the bank for 4 straight years to make that happen. I took on extra clients. I stayed late almost every single night reviewing loan applications until my hands cramped up so badly I could barely hold a pen. I can still feel that ache sometimes, a phantom pain in my knuckles. Then there was the wedding. $25,000. Leo's family, it turned out, couldn't afford their half, so I had quietly covered it all. I didn't want to embarrass anyone. The reception hall, the flowers, her dress, everything had to be perfect for my little girl. That's what I told myself. And then the house. $80,000. That came directly from my retirement savings, a huge, painful chunk of what I had planned to live on for the rest of my life. It was for their down payment, because, young couples need a little help getting started. That's what fathers do, I reasoned. That's what Eleanor would have wanted me to do. After that, the monthly payments became a regular thing, as predictable as the sunrise. $1,200 for their mortgage, because the house was, of course, still in my name. $300 for the utilities, $500 for groceries whenever Amelia would call, her voice full of carefully rehearsed woe, saying that money was tight that month. My Social Security check, the money I had earned over a lifetime of work, just disappeared into their lives, piece by piece, month by month. And for years, I had convinced myself that this was love, that this was what it meant to be a good father. The Pine Lodge Motel sat on the edge of town, a low, unassuming building with faded paint and a neon sign that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The
The room was small, but it was clean. It had a bed, a chair, and a tiny table by the window. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress. The silence in the room was different from the silence at home. It wasn't a comfortable, lived-in quiet. It was a hollow, empty silence that echoed with the loneliness of a temporary space. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I wasn't looking for friends or family. I was looking for numbers I knew by heart from my 30 years in finance. Bank numbers, insurance companies, credit card services. Tomorrow was Sunday, but in today's world, some things can always be done. Some calls can always be made. I opened my laptop on the small, wobbly table and logged into my online banking portal. The account balances glowed on the screen. Checking, savings, my retirement accounts. They were just numbers, but they represented a lifetime of careful planning, of saying no to myself, of denying myself small luxuries so that I could take care of my family. The cursor blinked expectantly in the search bar, waiting. It was time for me to decide what came next. Sunday morning dawned gray and overcast, a perfect match for my mood. I spread my paperwork out across the motel table, arranging it like a general planning a military campaign. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents. Everything was organized. Everything was within reach. 30 years as a financial planner had taught me the value of being meticulous. My first call was to First National Bank. I knew their Sunday operations were limited, but the automated systems, well, they never sleep. After navigating the maze of the phone tree, a polite, professional voice finally answered, "Good morning, Mr. Miller. How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel an automatic mortgage payment. It's for the property at 847 Pine Street. The payment is from my account ending in 4729. There was a pause on the other end, the soft sound of computer keys clicking. "Sir, am I correct? This payment has been active for the past 5 years. Are you certain you wish to discontinue it?" "Completely certain," I replied, without a moment's hesitation. "May I ask the reason for this change, sir?" I took a quiet breath. "The homeowners," I said, choosing my words very carefully, "no longer qualify for my financial assistance." More clicking. "Very well, Mr. Miller. The automatic payment will be canceled effective immediately. You should receive a written confirmation in the mail within 3 to 5 business days." One down. The second call was even easier. Geico had been insuring both of their cars on my policy for 3 years. Leo's big Silverado pickup and Amelia's little Honda sedan. That was $280 every single month for vehicles I never drove, providing coverage for accidents I would never cause. I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy. My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage. "And when would you like this change to take effect, sir?" "Today," I said. The credit cards, now they took a bit longer. Amelia was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts: Visa, MasterCard, and the store card from Costco. For years, I'd been paying down balances of $500 or more a month, balances I had never created for purchases I had never made. "Mr. Miller, removing an authorized user will require them to apply for their own lines of credit. Any outstanding balances will remain your responsibility, but they will no longer be able to make new charges on the account." "I understand completely. Please remove them immediately."
With each call, with each canceled payment, I felt a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. It was a strange, liberating feeling. 30 years of banking experience had taught me the ins and outs of these systems, the precise legal language, the proper procedures. Everything I was doing was methodical, logical, and completely within my rights as the account holder. The last item on my list for the day was my life insurance policy.
Changing the beneficiary required written documentation, but I started the process right then and there. It was a $100,000 policy that was supposed to go to Amelia, money I had set aside to protect her future. But my idea of family and my idea of the future had changed dramatically in the last 24 hours. By noon, I had made 8 phone calls. The mortgage payments were stopped. The car insurance was canceled. The credit cards were blocked. The automatic transfers that had been slowly bleeding my accounts dry for years, all of it was over. All it took were a few polite conversations and a list of confirmation numbers. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair and looked at my notes. Confirmation numbers, reference codes, effective dates. It was a paper trail of my newfound financial independence. My phone sat on the table, silent. They didn't know yet. They probably wouldn't know until the first payment bounced, until the first bill arrived with their names on it instead of mine. But they would know soon enough. I closed my laptop and walked over to the window. Across the parking lot, an elderly couple was loading suitcases into a pickup truck. The husband was doing the heavy lifting, while his wife directed the operation with a kind of gentle efficiency. They looked happy. I felt a pang of envy watching them, seeing the easy partnership they shared, the way they moved around each other with a practiced, comfortable familiarity. Eleanor and I had been like that once. My phone buzzed against the table. An unknown number. I looked at it for a moment, then let it go to voicemail. Not yet. I wasn't ready to talk yet. I was still busy taking things apart. Rebuilding would have to come later, if it came at all. The week passed in a blur of quiet routine for me, but apparently not for them. I settled into a new rhythm at the Pine Lodge. I'd get coffee from the lobby in the morning, have breakfast at the little diner down the street, and take long, quiet walks through Kalispell's neighborhoods, just watching the world go by. My phone, meanwhile, was accumulating missed calls like a stamp collector I had no interest in becoming. By Wednesday, there were 12 of them. By Friday morning, that number had climbed to 22. I decided to listen to them all in chronological order, like listening to a story unfold. It was fascinating, in a sad sort of way, to hear the progression from confusion to anger, and finally to utter desperation. The first few messages were almost casual. It was Amelia, her voice sounding a little annoyed, asking if there was some kind of banking error with the mortgage payment. Then it was Leo, leaving these brief, irritated messages about the car insurance lapsing. But by the middle of the week, you could hear the panic creeping into their voices. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Amelia's voice cracked with frustration in one message. "The bank says you stopped the automatic payment. They want the full amount by Friday, or they're going to start foreclosure proceedings." Leo's messages grew more and more aggressive. "Arthur, you need to fix this right now. I've got people asking me questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats." The latter calls, the ones from Thursday and Friday, they bordered on begging. There was one where Amelia was audibly crying, promising they'd work something out if I would just please call them back. Leo even tried a different tactic, his voice suddenly soft and conciliatory, claiming he'd been too harsh and that he wanted to make things right. I deleted each message right after I listened to it. I felt a strange detachment, a mild curiosity about their growing chaos, but nothing more. Then on Thursday morning, there was a knock at my motel room door. It was loud and insistent. I peered through the peehole and saw them both standing there. Amelia was wearing a wrinkled sweater, and Leo was in his work clothes. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. I just stood there, blocking the entrance. "Dad," Amelia started, her eyes red-rimmed. Her usual composure was completely gone. We need to talk." "About what?" I asked calmly. Leo pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. "About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about a beer." "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Leo," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I am simply no longer paying for your lives." "The mortgage, Arthur! You can't just stop paying the mortgage! That's our house!" Actually, I corrected him gently. "It's my house. My name is on the deed. My signature is on the loan. You two were just guests." Amelia quickly grabbed Leo's arm as he took another step toward me. "Dad, please," she pleaded. "We can work this out. Leo was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were. But you can't just leave us like this with no warning, no discussion." "You gave me an ultimatum," I reminded her, my gaze unwavering. "Do what Leo says or get out." Those were your exact words, Amelia. I didn't mean it like that."
"Yes, you did," I said, looking at my daughter and seeing a stranger wearing her face. "You meant every single word. You just never, in a million years, expected me to choose option 2. Leo tried to regain control, his voice taking on an artificially calm tone. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but we're talking about our home here, our credit, our entire lives. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this." "I can," I said, simply, "and I did. You wanted me to leave, so I left. You wanted to handle your own lives, so now you can." I started to close the door. "Dad, wait!" Amelia's voice broke. "What about family? What about everything we've been through together?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and looked at her desperate face. For a fleeting moment, I remembered the little girl who used to help me rake leaves in the autumn, the one who would bring me handfuls of dandelions she'd picked from the yard. But that little girl had grown into a woman who could stand by silently while her husband humiliated her father in his own living room. "Family works both ways, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time for you to show a little care for me, you chose him instead." Leo's fake composure finally cracked. "You crazy old bastard! You can't just—" "I can call the police if you continue to raise your voice," I interrupted him cleanly. "This is private property, and you are disturbing the peace." They just stared at me. I think in that moment, they were seeing me clearly for the very first time in years. Not as the soft-hearted father, not as the convenient bank account with legs, but just as a man who had finally learned to say no. Leo grabbed Amelia's elbow roughly. "Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves." They walked back to their car, Leo's usual swagger completely gone, replaced by the worried hunch of a man in trouble. Amelia glanced back over her shoulder one last time, her expression a mixture of confusion and hurt, like she was looking at a complete stranger. I watched them drive away. Then I closed the door. The work of dismantling a one-sided relationship, I was learning, was far from finished. I knew I needed to think, to get out of that stuffy motel room. The diner on Main Street had always been a refuge for me, especially in the years after Eleanor passed. I'd go there for a quiet cup of coffee and just watch the world go by. So, on Tuesday morning, I found myself walking the familiar 3 blocks, my breath misting in the crisp mountain air.
The routine felt grounding after the chaos of the last few days. The little bell over the diner door chimed as I entered, and the familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I had just settled into my usual corner booth when I heard a voice call out my name. "Ben Harrison! Well, I'll be damned!" I looked up and saw Ben rising from a table near the window. Ben and I had worked together at First National for over 15 years before he was transferred to the main branch. He handled commercial loans, I handled personal accounts, but we'd shared enough coffee breaks and complaints about management to consider ourselves friends. "Ben," I said, standing to shake his hand. It felt good to see a friendly face. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already sliding into the seat opposite me. "Haven't seen you since Eleanor's service. Heard you're staying out at the Pine Lodge. Everything all right?" The waitress appeared with a pot of coffee before I had a chance to answer. I used the brief interruption to decide how much I should share. "Family situation," I said, finally, as she filled my cup. "Just needed some space to think things through." Ben nodded slowly, studying my face with the practiced eye of a man who listens to people's problems for a living. "That son-in-law of yours," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What kind of a fast one?" "Wanted a home equity loan," Ben said, his expression darkening. $50,000 on your house." The background noise of the diner seemed to fade away. My house. Leo wanted to borrow $50,000 against my house. "That's right," Ben continued. "He brought in some paperwork that looked official enough at first glance, but when we ran the title search," Ben shook his head, "everything came back to you, of course. Clean title, no co-signers, nothing that would give him any legal claim to the property." I set my cup down carefully, my hand trembling just a little. I was processing this new, staggering piece of information. When exactly did this happen, Ben?" "Back in December, maybe early January. I handled the application myself because of the amount. Rejected it, of course." Ben leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "Arthur, this wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate fraud. The documents he brought in, the ones that supposedly gave him ownership to the property, were forgeries." The words hit me like a splash of ice water. 3 months ago, while I was paying his bills, buying his groceries, and putting up with his disrespect, Leo had been actively planning to steal from me. This wasn't a recent development born from our argument. This was a premeditated crime. Did you report it?" I asked.
We rejected the application and flagged his information in our system. Since no money actually changed hands, it's a bit of a legal gray area, but I kept copies of everything, just in case. Ben looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "You really didn't know about this, did you?" I just shook my head, my mind reeling. What was he going to use the money for? Ben glanced around the diner before leaning in closer. "According to his application, it was for home improvements, but the word around town is that Leo's got some serious gambling debts, pretty substantial ones." "How substantial?" "You know Detective Morrison?" Ben asked. "His daughter was in Amelia's graduating class. Jim mentioned something to me a while back about Leo being a regular fixture at the Glacier Peaks Casino. He might know more." I did know Jim Morrison. We'd served on the church building committee together. "Ben," I said, my voice thick with a gratitude I couldn't fully express, "I appreciate you telling me this, more than you know." I pulled out my wallet to pay for the coffee I had barely touched. "Arthur, be careful," Ben said, his hand on my arm. "A man who would forge documents to steal from his family, there's no telling what desperate things he might do when he feels cornered." I walked back to the Pine Lodge with my mind racing. The pieces were all falling into place. Leo's constant disrespect, the ultimatum, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. He hadn't just seen me as a burden, he had seen me as a mark, a convenient source of cash to fund his secret gambling habit. The fight hadn't been about establishing dominance. It had been about maintaining his access to the money he already believed he was entitled to steal. Back in my motel room, I knew my quiet, systematic dismantling of his financial support was no longer enough. This had moved beyond a family dispute. This was something else entirely. The turning point wasn't just leaving. It was realizing that I hadn't just been disrespected, I had been targeted. My next call wasn't to a bank. It was to a lawyer. My new life began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, deliberate actions. I found a small, clean, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. The first thing I did was put Eleanor's picture on the nightstand. Then, on the advice of my lawyer, I began the process of selling the house on Pine Street. It was a painful decision, letting go of the home Eleanor and I had built, but it was no longer a place of peace. It was a monument to my own blindness. The eviction notice was served. Leo, true to form, tried to fight it, but with a clean title in my name, he had no legal leg to stand on. They were given 30 days to vacate. The legal proceedings for the attempted fraud were separate. With Ben Harrison's documentation and a quiet word from Detective Morrison confirming Leo's substantial debts, the district attorney took an interest. Leo wasn't just a disrespectful son-in-law, he was a man facing serious felony charges. Amelia called me once during that time. She was crying, begging me to stop, to not do this to her husband, to her. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't just hear her words. I heard what was beneath them. Fear. Not fear for me, but fear for the comfortable life that was crumbling around her. "Amelia," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "this is not about revenge. This is about consequences. You both made choices. Now you have to live with them." I hung up, and I didn't hear from her again. The house sold quickly. After paying off the remaining mortgage, I was left with a significant amount of money. The money I should have had in my retirement account all along. Leo, facing a mountain of evidence, took a plea deal. He got probation and a court order to pay restitution, though I knew I'd likely never see a dime of it. And that was okay. The freedom was worth more than the money. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I had my own space, my own routine. I reconnected with old friends from the bank, men like Ben, and we'd meet for coffee and talk about fishing and grandkids. I started volunteering at the local senior center, helping other retirees navigate their finances, teaching them how to spot scams and protect their savings. I found a purpose in it. The lesson I learned was a hard one. I learned that love isn't a blank check. I learned that family isn't about giving until you have nothing left. It's about mutual respect and support. And most importantly, I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-preservation. My greatest mistake wasn't being generous. It was allowing my generosity to be misunderstood as weakness. My new, improved life isn't extravagant, but it's peaceful. It's my own. I have my coffee in the morning, I take my walks, I help people who appreciate it, and I sleep soundly at night. I no longer live in a house full of ghosts and expectations. I live in a home built on a new principle, the most important one of all: self-respect. And that's a foundation that no one can ever take from me again.